So hi everybody. So today we've got lots and lots of people making socks. So I thought I would do a video on Kitchener stitch. Kitchener is the term commonly used for grafting the toe of a sock. That term actually is credited to the Earl of Kitchener during the Crimean War, I believe, when he sort of revolutionized the way to close the toe of socks in order to reduce blisters on his soldiers' feet. So anyway, that's where that comes from. So when I first started knitting, the shop that I went to gave me a little slip of paper that said, take on as if to knit, like leave on as if to purl, front needle, back needle, take off as if to purl, leave on as if to knit. And they said, just memorize this, right? Or just follow it, right? Each row, and you'll be just fine. And so that's what I did for a long time. But in reality, I don't like not understanding what I'm doing. So when we're grafting or Kitchenering, we're actually literally creating one more row of stitches between the stitches that are on the needle. And the easiest way to sort of remember what you're doing is that as you look at the loop of a stitch, those legs in that stitch literally mean that your yarn is coming out from behind, coming around, and coming back in. So the way we enter the stitch and come back off, right, is taking that yarn through each of those stitches twice, and that's what's creating that loop. So I'm going to describe it in a way that's hopefully fairly easy for you to remember, but really, really important. There are a couple of things that you have to know. First of all, when somebody tells you that you need to do something knitwise or purlwise, that has to do with the direction the needle enters. It has nothing to do with the yarn. So if I'm going to enter a stitch knitwise, it's this direction because that's how I would enter a stitch if I were knitting. If I'm to enter a stitch purlwise, it would be this direction because that's how I enter the stitch as if I'm purling. So again, in this case, it has nothing to do with where the yarn is. And anytime it says knitwise or purlwise, it is not necessarily telling you where the yarn should be. Okay, the next thing is how much yarn do you need? So for a tiny little toe of a sock, it's pretty easy to guess, but sometimes we're Kitchenering large pieces together. So what you want to do, and this is true for pretty much anything, if you can take your yarn 3 times, and I always do 3 times and a little bit generous, across the space of what you're knitting, that means you would have enough to work another row, to work a bind off, to work whatever you need. So sometimes your pattern will say 8 inches, pull out, leave whatever amount. I just tell you to put your yarn, throw your yarn sort of generously over those stitches 3 times and you'll be just fine. Okay, so really quickly, your yarn, typically on a sock, right? Your yarn is going to be coming from the back and it's set up already. This, by the way, is very, very basic Kitchener, so I'm not going to go into all the troubleshooting stuff. So if your yarn is set up already, we're all good to go. What I said earlier that we'll be going through every single stitch twice is true, except for the 2 end stitches. We're just going to go ahead and go through those once. So the motion is, and let me just back up one more time. So you can see that this is our knit side right here because we see all of our really lovely little knit stitches. And if we open up and the way that these stitches are facing us, we see those little purl bumps. So this is technically the wrong side. If you can keep in mind that this is the right side or the knit side, and this is the wrong side or the purl side, it really helps you guide you in what you're going to be doing. So the first thing we're going to do is we take the first stitch off knitwise. How do we know that? Because we're on the knit side. So where we always start with what the stitches are on that side. So I'm going to take the first stitch off knitwise and take it off. And then I'm going to come immediately into that second stitch purlwise. And only at that point when I am in both of those stitches am I going to pull my yarn through. Our goal is to have fairly consistent tension with what we were before. So you want to pull it firmly, but not tightly, and you don't want to leave it so loose that your stitches are really big. Once we've worked the front and our yarn is coming from the front, we know that means we need to go to the back. Since the purl side is facing me, I'm going to take that first stitch off purlwise, enter the second stitch knitwise, and then pull all the way through. So you can see again, we're going both directions. I'm coming back to the front. Since I'm on the knit side, I take that first stitch off knitwise, then I'm going to come into that second stitch purlwise and leave it on and pull my yarn through. Back to the back needle, because it's a purl side facing me, I take that stitch off purlwise. I always do the opposite on the next one, so I'm going to leave it on knitwise and pull my yarn through. You have to sort of play with this a little bit to get that yarn to go where you want it to go. It's part of knitting, isn't it? And back to the front and back to the knit side. So I take that first stitch off knitwise. I'd always do the opposite on the second one. So I'd go through purlwise and pull my yarn through. Do not pull your yarn all the way through the first one and then go into the second one, because you will inevitably wonder, where am I? So if I go through the first one purlwise and just take it off, and you'll just notice I just have it hanging out on the needle, going into the second stitch knitwise, and then I'm going to pull all the way through. Let me show you what it looks like. And remember, when my yarn's coming from here, I know I'm going to come to the front. If I take my first stitch off knitwise and I pull all the way through, my yarn is now attached to the front, and I don't necessarily remember if I'd gone through this stitch or not. And that's why we want to do both. So now I'm going to come through that one, purlwise, and leave it on. And I'm going back to the back. And because I'm on the purl side, I'm going to come through that first stitch purlwise, second stitch knitwise, and leave it on. Pull through both. Off as if to knit, on as if to purl, pull through both. Off as if to purl, on as if to knit, and pull through both. Then you're left with 2 stitches. When you have just those last 2 stitches, you're going to do exactly what you've done before, which is to take the first stitch off knitwise, the second stitch off purlwise. I go ahead and go through them both and pull through. Now, inevitably, you are left with this little bit of an ear right over here. And I'm going to show you what to do with that in a second. But can you see these little stitches are the ones that we just added to that really, really pretty toe. And it leaves such a nice and seamless seam. Okay, then when we have this little bit right up here, we simply come back through that hole right at the edge, pull it down, and it tucks that little ear right in. And then you would just weave in your end on the inside. And that is your very, very basic Kitchener stitch. Hope that helps you. Thanks so much.